because yeah, which people don't know who you are, obviously. So
Yeah, no, that's cool. Yeah, I've purposely stayed a little in the shadows.
in the shadows, exactly. Okay, so let me start this one off. First of all, welcome back to Midcurve. Don't know what episode this is, doesn't really matter. But today we have on someone very interesting, someone who I have great conversations with every time we meet up in real life. Um, we always seem to have, I always seem to have the most interesting conversations with you. So I wanted to bring you on and get you to tell me some more stories or some more fun facts that I don't know anything about. But this actually, I'll just let you introduce yourself. Who are you, and who are you to Jito?
I'm Jed Leggett. I am a backend engineer at Jito. I've been working on the block engine for a little over 2.5 years now. And from the early days before mainnet launch, when we were just on testnet, and before things kind of got crazy and took off, and we were trying to rapidly
Yeah.
scale. So through all of that.
But you're not just that, aren't you? Aren't you also a farmer? Don't you have a farm?
Yeah. So I live on a small cattle farm, just mostly hobbyist. Don't make a living off of it or anything, but keep myself and my family and grass fed beef. Inherited it from my father. He started doing grass fed beef back in the mid '90s, and was always a big passion for him. And so when he passed away, we decided to take it over. Didn't want to lose the herd. He had worked on his genetics for quite a
Man,
bit, and so been doing that, I guess,
that
about 10 years
so
now.
like side note before we get into all this stuff, something I'm also interested in is grass-fed beef. So right now we buy our beef from a farm down the road. But something that I want to get into in the future is like raising a couple head of cattle. So just like while I have you here, how hard is it to raise a couple head of cattle and actually like, get your own meat?
Uh,
Okay.
well, okay, so I've never done a couple. I've always had 20 to 30. I
Hmm.
know people that have done just one or two head, and that's as long as you have enough land, and that's going to be depend on where you are in terms of how much what the growing season is. But I mean, it's not terribly hard. It's something that most people could do if they tried and
Yeah.
read about it on the internet for a little while. It basically replaces my time at the gym, so I don't go to the gym. I raise cattle instead, and that gets me most of the activity that I need
That's
to
okay.
stay in mild
So, fun
shape.
fact about me, I actually grew up on a farm. I didn't become, total suburbanite until like middle school. My dad went into finance instead. He's a pure math major, but he always wanted to own a farm. So when I was young, we had a farm. And I remember growing up on it, and it was awesome. And I was telling one of the other guys at Jito this the other day, but it's like I always wanted to get away from that when I was growing up. Like I never wanted to be the farm boy. I wanted to like go live in the cities and like live in Asia and Europe and all that. And the older I get, it's like it's pulling me back. Like you can take the boy off the farm, but you can't take the farm out of the boy.
Oh
You know what
yeah.
I mean? So
Yeah, no, it was more my wife that pulled us back here because I was like,
yeah,
"Oh, no, I don't know. I don't wanna go back there." Like you said, I mean,
yeah.
soon as I left when I was 16, went to boarding school, and I couldn't get far enough away from this place, and then by the time I was 30, I was back
Yeah.
here, and now I'd be
It's a good
afraid to
life.
leave.
It's a good life. So before Judo though, what were you doing before Judo? Because I actually don't know this.
So I was working for a small company that was located on a NASA test site. So it's a NASA facility where they do rocket engine testing. We worked. It was kind of a spin out of a geospatial group that did a lot of high end camera work. And so, like one of the projects I worked on for a while that kind of led into what I do at Jito was high speed cameras built for rocket engine testing. So we built high dynamic range cameras that could handle very bright plume as well as capture dark things that were not right in the plume. So typically people were choosing between either blown out imagery that you could actually
Mhm.
see the nozzle, or you could see the plume and the actual rocket itself was just gone. And so we used high speed Ethernet cameras for that. So we were using 10 gigabit NICs with fiber optics to the cameras. So I got a lot of experience in high speed networking through that, and then did kind of a couple other applications in machine vision and a few things like that. I was there for I think about 6 years before Jita.
Okay. So you did that for 6 years, then you, like, went directly to Jito Labs?
Yeah, yeah. So I actually, I mean, well, I kind of eased out of that job. I didn't quit all at once. I just kind of steadily reduced my
Yeah.
hours with the goal of going into crypto. So I was actively hunting a crypto job, and then just kind of steadily reduced my hours there as I looked, and then eventually just went very part time and just kind of came down when they needed support on old systems that I'd built.
And what year was this?
So that would have been in, I guess I was kind of fully gone from there
Okay,
at
22.
spring of 22. Yeah, because then I started at
Okay.
Jito in May of
So,
22.
why I guess why crypto? Like, why were you convinced that you wanna leave probably a pretty stable job to go into this industry?
Yeah, I had
Mm,
been dabbling for quite a while. Well, actually not. I had been researching. This is I'm a typical. My background is physics. I was in a PhD program for a while. Never got around to finishing it, but kind of the typical researcher. Like I read white paper after white paper, dug deep in, never even invested a dollar. Where I should have. I knew all of the things to know to distinguish. A couple of friends that I gave tips to back in 2013, 14 uh, took more action than I ever did. But I'd watched it through several cycles, and I guess it was more of I didn't have a lot of money to invest, but I had time and some skill to read and learn about it. So I invested probably too much time and not enough money through starting in around 2012 and through several cycles. And so it got to a point where I felt like crypto was big enough that there was a
mhm,
stable pool of jobs. Um, and this was 2022 was kind of the post COVID, like, free money boom, still was kind of coming to a close there. So there were just job boards with thousands of jobs, everywhere. So it seemed like a good
yeah.
time to
Yeah,
to
that
make the
makes
jump if
sense.
I was going to
I
do it.
mean, it's funny. So don't take any offense to this, no offense, but as a right curve person, you kinda mid-curve that one, and you just
Oh yeah,
that's
for sure. Yeah,
that's
no.
funny. Luckily, I'm more of a left curve.
No, yeah, so I've I feel like my biggest skill is the wisdom to be able to look back and admit when I was dead wrong about things. And that was another reason that made me want to make the jump, is that I had been wrong about enough stuff that I felt like
Mhm.
I had worked through my misconceptions.
Ye
Um, I was kind of on the wrong side of the block size wars, pushing for bigger blocks. And in hindsight, those Blockstream guys probably knew a thing or two about what they were talking about, at least for Bitcoin. Uh, I mean, I'm all about bigger blocks, but it needed a new chain.
Yeah. So you're for bigger blocks then on Solana?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I don't. I mean, I don't think anybody in Solana is like against increasing block size. That's always the long term vision. It's more just like how far can we go currently, and as soon as we can go bigger, it will. I think in terms of like the niche that Bitcoin decided to fill was the right niche for that network. uh, but it didn't need bigger blocks. It didn't need layered applications on top of it. I don't. I'm not really bullish long term Bitcoin based DeFi or anything like that. I was involved a little bit with the counterparty decks back in the day, um, and we were trying to build, DEX functionality on the Bitcoin chain itself. This was before Ethereum mainnet launched, and there's just many
Yeah.
reasons why it's not a good fit, um, and mostly just because the chain is not made to evolve. It's not made to support new applications. It's made to replace gold, to be a digital gold, be a reserve asset, and so I think having a chain like Solana that is built for the purpose of
Hmm.
building high speed applications on top of it is a much better fit for DeFi for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree, obviously. But I think this kind of leads us into the next thing that I wanted to talk about with you, which is like, where do you see the state of Solana right now? Um, and just the state of crypto in general. Are you optimistic about where we're headed? And
Yeah,
what do
I
you
am.
think? Go ahead.
And I know that's kind of at this point is somewhat of a contrarian take to be optimistic and to think that there's actually going to be some real world applications to built on these rails. I think we're still in the process of the technology maturing, unfortunately. So I know that the kind of the trope is that crypto is just full of endless infrastructure projects, and each cycle it's just a new set of infrastructure projects. But I think there's actually some validity to the need to just continue to build out the basic rails, and I think that many in crypto were just too impatient. They wanted this final state, this cycle, because of their bags, and instead, that's not how technology develops. You find the bugs when you get to the next level of
Mhm,
scale that you had not reached before, and you just have to you continuously iterate on the design and change things. Uh, and that's just basic engineering. Is
mhm,
iterative design always wins out? And I think we're right at the threshold of what people were talking about 10 years ago of building. There was an old Bitcoin developer, Mike Hearn, who had just like these crazy ideas of what we are going to be able to use Bitcoin for. Famously, there were going to be these self-driving taxis that would auction off lane space in real time, and it was all going to use Bitcoin. And so, sometime during the block size wars, he had probably one of the most famous flame out messages of all time, and he left the space. And I think some of his ideas were way out there, but I think that we are finally getting close to being able to try
mhm.
some of these applications out to really have just near instantaneous permissionless payments. Now, what can we do with that? Uh, and
Mm.
I really think we're just now getting started. And I know that's another trope is like, oh, we're so early. We're still so early. I don't know that we're early, but we're not into the real game yet. We're still mostly pregame before things really take off. And
Yeah, what do you think needs to be built then? Like, what's coming that you would like to see?
well,
And also, like, do you have any crazy ideas? Like the whole taxi, like, lane auction space type thing? Do you have any ideas like that? Because those are always
yeah,
interesting
I
to
don't
me.
know. Let's see. I mean, I've let go of a lot of the crazier ideas that I thought, but um, so I mean, what's coming? I think everybody is pretty aware. I mean, I think Fire Dancer is going to change the game a lot. The code base there, the quality. For a little while, when I was doing my physics PhD, I worked at National Labs on supercomputers, and they just had teams of people who uh, were writing highly optimized code. And that's not honestly what I saw in crypto a lot before Fire Dancer. There was a lot of hastily written code. It was amazing how quickly people ship in crypto, but just with a detailed understanding of like how the hardware of a computer actually works, and not trying to just write this abstraction that doesn't consider that there's actual memory bandwidth there. There's actual cache lines that you have to think about. And so when you're in this HPC world, I mean, you're working on the largest computer in the world. So the idea that if your code is inefficient, you can just scale bigger is out the window. These people are working on leading edge machines, and so these teams are used to getting the last bit of performance out of the hardware that they can, because their entire job is to squeeze the hardware to the limits. And I mean, I would say Fire Dancer is the first crypto example of that. The Ethereum clients aren't written with that in mind. That I've none of them that I've looked at. You know, the Solana client was done amazingly quickly, in my opinion. Like the fact that those guys got us from zero to Solana in a few years was very incredible. But this kind of second pass that the Fire Dancer team is doing, of really just tuning to the hardware, is just going to unlock a level of performance that just hasn't existed yet. And then I think with that, then you start to get a lot more experimentation
Mm,
in use cases. So I think, I mean, to me, crypto's biggest use case will be social coordination. Um, so I mean, I would give an example of working with a community organization. My wife's involved in town, and it's just our town's women's club. It's been around since my grandmother was in it, 50 years ago, and they do projects to make the town prettier. They raised a bunch of money to redo a bunch of sidewalks, things like that. But there's always this very painful organizations like that. In my opinion, you see them very cyclically go up and down in terms of their effectiveness. It's usually centered around a single individual uh, doing most of the work and getting volunteers and doing things like that. And a lot of that comes from the fact that you need somebody that can be the name on the bank account. You need somebody that can sign checks. And then once that person starts to get burnt out, the organization tends to dwindle. And a lot of times, then they just die. Or somebody finally comes along, the name on the bank account is transferred to that new person who is the president of whatever the organization is. And I think with permissionless finance, that unlocks a lot of new structures for community organizations on a smaller scale. And so in that way, I mean, if you've got a multi-sig that has these funds, has control of these funds, you can start to raise money for community events, for community improvement, and you can have transparency in how those funds are spent. You can easily create ad hoc committees that actually have control of money and have real power, because that's always the problem with any sort of community organization, is that you have these committees, but unless they can sign checks, they can't really they can't enact physical change in the world. They can't actually pay for the sidewalks,
yeah,
for instance. So I think starting from just like that's one example, a very small scale thing. And I know that's like not exciting to anybody who's looking to pump their bags. That's not the next unicorn, right? But I think when you start to see organizations experiment with that, and the power of multi-sig wallets really starts to be unleashed, you'll have much more creative ideas as these grow to be bigger and bigger
yep,
organizations. And then you can do a lot of good in the world with those.
that's right. And first of all, I mean, that might not be a sexy idea. However, I would never underestimate the power of like mothers to organize $1 billion business. So during COVID, for example, and schools were shut down or whatever. There were a couple of homeschooling moms that organized some pods, and it turned into a franchise, it turned into a business, and now it's like $100 million a year
Wow.
business because these moms just activated each, they just went off like, no, we're gonna build these little homeschool pods, and then it just blew up, right? So I think that there is opportunity in those types of things, especially like using crypto to fund those types of things, organize those types of things, and build them. And it would be much easier than going through the traditional banking system. And for me, it's really interesting because I have a little one and another one coming, and like those, like I'm looking at organizing a homeschool pod here in our town, and crypto could be a massive part of that. So I think for me, yes, like that's not a sexy thing, but it's a real world thing that actually is going to affect my life.
Yeah.
And I think that's very helpful. And then and that's like that's the foundation, right? And then once those little organizations, those community organizations are working, other people see that and they build upon that. And then you build bigger and bigger and bigger companies. All of a sudden you have all real world assets trading on Solana, and it's all powered by Jito. That's the dream, right?
Yeah, I mean, there was a time when only the super nerdy were on the internet. Only, a handful of people were using email in the world. And that seemed novel.
Mhm.
And that's what people thought of as the internet was like, oh yeah, it's just that thing that has email and you can check the stock price or something. You really couldn't do that much on the internet, even after the basic rails were built out. Like we had a lot of the functioning technology, TCP over IP. The global backbone was for the most part laid. You could do a lot of what people do on the internet in 2001. Uh, Still, people have innovated tremendously since then in the way
Mhm.
that they use the internet for social coordination. And I think that especially the payments aspect, the permissionless payments, it doesn't. I mean, I think, and that took me a long time to come to terms with that. You could implement payments without necessarily
Yeah.
creating your own new reserve currency. I think both of those things
Yeah.
are important things to do. But if you're expecting to use the same asset to both establish a new global reserve currency and get people to pay for goods and services with that. That was just too many applications rolled into one. And so stable coins, I think, unlock there's you don't have to get people to change their mindset about prices or worry about volatility in the asset. And so stable coins on permissionless rails, it's internet cash. It is what everyone in the
Yeah.
early days was
Yeah.
hoping Bitcoin would become.
That kind of leads me into another thing I wanted to talk to you about. Just kind of pivoting here a little bit, but I mean, we're talking about Bitcoin. You and I mean, I don't know when you got into Bitcoin. I was in Bitcoin fairly early, like around 2013, 2014, for ideological reasons, specifically, yeah, right, like libertarian
Right.
ideology. Um,
The only people in the
a bunch of
space back
weirdos.
then were had some sort of
Yeah,
ideology.
but I mean, I studied finance in college, and yeah, I mean, it just like long story short, just Austrian economics always resonated with me. It just seemed logical to me, and so Bitcoin made a lot of sense. And also, like you have that. I had that. I don't know. I just had this belief that like government should be a very small part of my life, and that people should be allowed to choose to do whatever they want to do, and like everyone should just stay out of each other's lives. And we've had this conversation a few times, I think. But I want to know, like, well, first of all, I don't even know this anymore. But if you are libertarian, how do you feel about how crypto has evolved from those early days when we were in it for just those ideological reasons until now, where we're just like trading meme coins and stuff? Like or before this call, we brought up financial nihilism. Um, can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, and for me, I will say my ideological bent has definitely softened quite a bit the older I
Yeah.
got.
Okay, stop right there. Let's start with that. Why has it softened?
Okay, well, it was pretty much at its peak in early 2010s, like 2012, 2013.
Mhm.
My dad had been really into the Ron Paul campaign, so that's what he bought me a copy of End of the Fed. I read it, and of course, I was early 20s and was just like, this is it. This is all the problems in the world are the Federal Reserve. Bam! I figured it out. Because I mean, I think in your early 20s, a lot of people are looking for the boogeyman that is the cause of all the world's problems. Um,
They're looking for the man.
Right, yeah, I
Yep.
mean, and so I was definitely heavily influenced by that. As I went on, I guess I I eventually had to admit that, the United States Federal Reserve has not done the worst job of any central bank. Maybe there's I
No.
ideologically believe whether or not there should be central banks at all, but, like, several people made the point to me that, the average American, up until fairly recently, has had a fairly stable financial system, compared to when we look at other countries, for sure. Um, I guess I also it seemed like for a long time to me that the U.S. government might be a threat to my liberty, right? That they're a government, they're my government, they might be overbearing. Um, but as I got older, I guess I started to understand a little bit more about external threats to my liberty as well. Um, and I guess my feelings towards the United States are much more the devil you know.
Mhm.
If I've got to contend with a government, at least this one seems to still work democratically. There's not a central party that maintains absolute control, or if they do, they fooled enough of us into thinking that this is still democratic. And I guess kind of like the we were talking about growing up on a farm, um, and can't wait to leave because it seems like the worst place ever. I mean, it's just isolated. There's nothing to do when you're a kid. And then you get older and you're like, well, the farm wasn't so bad. Uh, I, I'm much more pro America, I guess, than I was when I was younger, and that softened my. I still think we have to keep big government in check. We should always be vigilant. But my satisfaction, I guess, with the status quo in the United States is more than it was when I was a younger person, because I think I have had a lot of opportunities, and I think you know quitting my job and striking out on my own and being able to do that and find some success at that, I do still feel fairly free in this country. Uh,
Mhm.
for the most part, most things that I want to do, I'm still able to do that. I'm not worried right now on this podcast that anything I say, someone's going to show up in the middle of the night and I'm going to end up in a gulag. Um, I'm not saying the United States couldn't get to that in the future, but right now, in the country that we live in, I feel relatively free.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's why my ideology has softened a little bit. But there was another question I think that preceded that.
Mhm.
What was remind
Yeah,
me?
sorry. So first, just a couple comments on that. I think that there's a spectrum of libertarianism, right? You can be anarcho-capitalist, you can be, a few other things. So I don't think that it's like it's binary. You're either
Of course,
libertarian or you're not. Secondly, I would agree with you on almost all points. Like I've traveled the world now, because I was running from the farm, and I've seen other governments all over the place. And yes, like America is pretty awesome, to be honest with you. Like I've always had that belief. I've never wavered from the belief that America is like one of the best countries or the best place to live, especially if you want to strike out, like you said, strike out on your own, take risks and build something that just doesn't exist in a lot of other countries. That thought doesn't even exist in other countries. When I would talk to people there and tell them like, oh, my friends have like side hustles or they build business, whatever. They're like, oh, you're from a different planet. We don't do that here. It's just, you follow whatever your dad does.
right?
Right. And And so, like in that respect, yes, America is awesome. And I have a theory about that. I think it's because we're descendants of like risk takers, gangsters, revolutionists, and and cowboys. I mean, like literally, like our my family came from Italy. They're just a bunch of cowboys came over here and settled in California, and like took that massive risk. So I think that that's ingrained in American culture. But yeah, I would direct you to a few books. There's one called Money Free and Unfree. And it's pretty interesting. Kind of talks about like wildcat banking and like free Scottish banking in the I think 17th century and how it worked. And it was like decentralized banking, right? Where people could issue their own currency, and because of that, it would balance out any party that was trying to inflate their currency, right? Because
Right.
then you would just exchange like New York to Louisiana money, basically. New York tried to inflate their currency, you just transfer into Louisiana dollars or whatever. So I think that's really interesting. The other thing I have again like is just taxation. Like we went to war with England for way less tax than we get taxed now. It's like frog in the kettle type of thing, where we're just getting boiled alive right now. So that's my other problem with it, because I also don't see a lot of, benefits of my tax dollars going to my community, for example. Like, I think they're wasted and bloated. I know people who work in the government, and they're just like, they've seen the misappropriation of, like, in our state alone, $100 million
Yeah.
in the last year, right? And you're just like, what is going on? Like, where's this money going? It's just disappearing. So that's my biggest problem with the government. But again, I'm free to say that.
Oh, yeah, no, don't get me wrong. I'm not like a pro government, big
Yeah.
government bootlicker, by any means. I guess I'm just now at a point in my life where I still feel like those things can be changed in
Yeah.
through the system, not necessarily just
Yes.
opting out. It seemed more to me when I was younger that it was just fundamentally broken and could
Yeah.
never be fixed, and that the only option we had was just to completely opt out. And I think that was maybe a little naive and maybe throwing the
Mm,
baby out with the
mhm,
bathwater. Um, but then also, I'd say more specifically about crypto and how it evolved out of those like more extreme ideological roots. I compare it a lot to the open
mhm,
source software movement, which started with an entirely different name, wasn't even called open source. Is the watered down version, right? So this guy Richard Stallman started the free software movement, and he always said free as in freedom, not as in beer. It wasn't about free software as in like we're going to give it away. It was free software as in freedom. It was a very libertarian minded approach to software, and in the early days I was also a big adherent to that. I guess I mean, I was a little late to the party. I was a little too young to kind of be right in the early days of free software, but I was a user of GNU starting in around 1995, and was really big into that movement. But and at that time, I think the general zeitgeist was
mhm,
companies are bad, right? Companies take advantage of programmers and exploit them for all this money and then don't pay them that much. But programmers should just be able to release their software for free and all use it, and we can create this thing that is better. And I don't know that didn't play out quite as well as people thought it would. And now that I am a full time employed developer, I can kind of understand some of the arguments that if you don't have a, a functioning company to maintain software, usually it just goes
mm,
by the wayside. So it's going to go out of date. Software requires maintenance. It requires somebody with a vested interest in continuing to develop that project. Now, the business model that was used to produce a lot of the current internet, I think, is broken in a lot of ways. Um, but I no longer believe that like
mm,
companies are bad, and that companies that create proprietary software are inherently evil. And I think that was the ideological mindset of Richard Stallman. And so we see that progress from free software into open source software, which I think has made a huge positive impact on humanity. I couldn't have learned to do what I do without having open source software to look at. I think if that movement would have stayed with the original Richard Stallman roots, like a lot less code would have been
Mhm.
in the public domain. Like once things like MIT license came out, where people could release their code for everyone to see, but not prohibit others from using it to
Mhm.
make a buck, uh, then that's real freedom, in my opinion. Like it seemed like almost that the GNU mentality of the GPL, the GNU public license, of it explicitly prohibited anyone from ever using this code to ever make any money. Uh, in a way, that can be considered more restrictive, less free than the MIT license, which is just, okay, here it is. Do what you will. We provide no warranty, but here's the code. Do what you will with it. And so I feel like crypto has is somewhat matured in its ideology as well to be a little less dogmatic about, you know, only this pure way of doing things matters. Anyone who deviates from that is not really part of the fold. Um, I think now you have a much more practical group of people saying, how can we most quickly develop the tools
Mhm.
that regular people are going to use? Uh, and things like decentralization are going to have to be a push that comes, you know, once there's a functioning product. It doesn't matter how decentralized your network is if no one's using it. Who
Yeah,
cares, right?
exactly. So going back to the original, I guess, secondary question on the first question before we started, you know, going off on this, was how do you feel now? Like, given all this context now, like the your ideology, um, and where you've seen crypto come from, how do you feel about it now? Um, are you still optimistic about where we're going? Are we okay? Because right
Uh,
now, like, I mean, look at the state of things right
I'm
now. Honestly, I mean, it's like the main thing that people are really interested in are meme coins, right? It's just about getting rich. We built a big casino.
right.
Is that? And I've talked to many people. I've asked many people this question. I sound like Trump right there. I've talked to many people, but how do you feel about the state of things?
I'm the most
Mm,
optimistic I've been in the entire time I've been around crypto. I think there are so many ways in which it could have failed that it didn't. Uh, to think now we're past all of those hurdles, right? I mean, I used to tell people, you know, Bitcoin will either go to 100,000 or it'll go to zero. And that was when Bitcoin was in the 100 to $1,000 range. When they would ask me, well, what about this new Bitcoin thing? I said, who knows? 50-50 chance it'll either go to zero or go to 100,000. And so here we are. And I think that most of the failure modes we have circumvented, so that this piece of technology is at least going to be around another decade or two. Like, even if there was just the worst case scenario to me now is just a slow decay from where we are now in terms of usage and activity down to zero in a decade. Um, and I don't see that happening either. I do believe that now the foundation has been built, and it'll be up to kind of the next generation of developers that are coming online right now that think about all the people that got rich making an app for the
mhm,
iPhone or for Android. uh, I feel like this is the moment where now the App Store is just about done. And it wasn't Apple or Google that innovated all of the cool apps, right? Sometimes they copied them. They may have stolen some ideas, but there was definitely a period right after the launch of both of those app stores where there was just a kind of Cambrian explosion of what can we do with this. I remember the first person I saw with an iPhone, they were it took them a minute to really show me that it was that cool. Like, I mean, I remember a friend, he had a Bic lighter that he could like wave around and the flame would it was like an iPhone app that pretended to be a Bic lighter, and a tape measure, and things that just don't really affect anyone's life because no one knew what to do with it. And so I think I see meme coins, I mean, they're just the Bic
mm,
lighter stage of crypto, right? people didn't know what to build at first, so they built dumb things, and I mean, I don't own any meme coins. I will never buy any meme coins. Even if I could make money off of it, it's just not my thing. I'm not attracted to that type of thing. But I don't hate on them. I mean, if that's what you want to do, there's definitely worse ways than you can waste your money. Um, but it's also like I didn't hate on people who traded Beanie Babies or baseball cards, or I mean, baseball cards are pieces of paper that people pay ungodly sums for. I mean, I think that's just human nature to like to trade things. It's a game people like to play, and it's a great stress test
Mm,
from my perspective. Like, uh, we have been able to scale our systems very aggressively because of meme coins. Every level of 10x magnitude that we did around the corner was another 10x with the meme coin traders. And so, I mean, I thank those guys. Their money partially went to helping a bunch of engineers figure out how to scale distributed systems. And I think that helped, like race cars, teach you about engines and teach stock car manufacturers things they can do. You can run a set of tires the full lifetime of the tires in half a race, right? So that teaches you a lot about
mm.
tire technology. Does it mean anyone needs to drive around in a circle for 3 hours at 200 miles an hour? No, and some people don't like watching racing. That's not everybody's cup of tea, but it doesn't mean it hasn't benefited the lives of all of us in terms of better tires, better engines, better carburetors, better transmissions. The racing industry has done a lot towards the engineering of cars because it served as a stress test. And I think a lot of the meme coin trading activity that we've seen kind of falls into that
Mm.
same category.
I've never heard anyone put it that way, but that was an awesome metaphor, the race car thing, because I mean, it does. It makes sense, right? Some people have said,
Yeah, I know there's certain people out there that are very against analogous thinking, but I'm going to be contrarian on that, and I'm a huge fan of an analogy that I think, to a certain degree, the best way to elucidate a problem is to find a good analogous
I would
system to
agree.
compare it
I
to.
would agree because I like to think in like pictures, and that helps me honestly retain that information. So yeah, you're preaching to the choir on that one. All right, I think we're coming up on our time here, but and I mean, I feel like I haven't even scratched the surface with you, man. We've only gone over like four things I wanted to talk about. But last thing, let's just wrap this one up with where Jito is
Okay.
going and what you see, what like in a perfect world where Jito is at the end of this year.
Uh, hmm, that's a tough one, honestly, because I think I think from the backend engineer perspective, a lot of my day is just focused on tomorrow, next week, the next 10x of load. Um,
So is it like Jito's
and
integrated
there's
with
there's a lot of great ideas, and also there's a lot I can't
okay,
talk about.
okay. All right,
So
that's fair.
yeah, I mean, I'll leave some of it at that. I'm excited. I can say that the ideas that I've seen floating around recently are very cool, very revolutionary. It's very much a Jito 2.0 coming down the pike. So I'll hype it up and tease it a little bit there, but yeah, there's can't say much more than that.
So those were the ideas I was hoping to pull out of you. I was hoping you'd give us
Okay.
some bull posting, but that's okay if you can't say anything about it.
Oh,
Um,
no, no, I will not leak alpha. That's the one thing I will not do.
okay. I think we should do another one of these, and we should just dive into the next one we do. We should just talk about. Um, I don't even know how to put it. They're not conspiracy theories, but just like stories that you've told me on some of our offsites because they're always so interesting. You always have these like interesting stories about like how Louisiana got its what was it like? What was that story? The
oil
oil rights,
rights.
how Louisiana got its
Yep.
oil rights.
Yeah, they totally screwed Mississippi on that. Put a barrel in the Mississippi River and let it float out to sea, and wherever the path the barrel traced out, that was the who got the oil rights. Which I'm sure some crooked Mississippi politicians have been paid off to accept such a terrible idea, because the way the Mississippi River drains, the water goes straight east almost, and just gave Louisiana all the oil rights. But yeah,
Exactly. This is the kind of stuff I feel like we could fill an hour with. And like I don't even remember all the stories you've told me, but every time we talk, I come away just like kind of like mind blown with your depth of knowledge. So we'll do another one. For now, we'll wrap it up though, because we're already at
okay.
45 minutes. Sir, I appreciate it. Appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. Let's do it again.